I remember the exact moment my suburban life began to darken. The day my father brought her into our home. I was 14 then, living in a modest house on Maplewood Drive, one of those neighborhoods with white picket fences where everyone smiles politely and minds their own business behind closed doors. After my mother died, it had just been Dad and me trying to stitch our lives back together. I was a shy, studious kid who found solace in school, a top student in every class chasing grades like lifelines. At home, though, silence hung heavy, the silence of loss of things we never talked about as we navigated our grief. When Dad introduced me to Elizabeth, the woman who would soon become my stepmother, a cold knot of apprehension formed in my gut. She stood on our porch in a crisp white blouse, wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My father's face glowed with hope that this woman might heal our broken family. Trailing behind Elizabeth was her daughter Samantha, about my age. We were only a few months apart. Samantha gave a quick, tight-lipped grin that felt more like a formality than a welcome. When her gaze met mine, I sensed something guarded and hostile there, as if she had already decided I was an intruder. A few months later, Dad married Elizabeth in a simple courthouse ceremony. Right after they exchanged vows, Elizabeth pulled me into an unexpected hug. She leaned in close and whispered, "We're going to be one happy family now, darling." Her manicured nails pressed into my shoulder just enough to make me wince. I forced a smile for Dad's sake, but my heart was pounding. I wanted to believe her. Maybe a new mother figure and a sister were exactly what I needed. Maybe I won't feel so alone anymore, I dared to hope. Those hopes withered almost as soon as Elizabeth and Samantha moved in. The change in our home was subtle at first, like a tightening noose. In the mornings, Elizabeth would cook stacks of blueberry pancakes drenched in syrup, but only for her daughter. "There's cereal if you're hungry," she'd say to me with a thin smile, nodding at a box of generic bran flakes. Dad left for work before dawn most days, so he never saw these small slights. I told myself not to take it personally. Maybe she just needs time to adjust. I ate my bland cereal quietly, while Samantha feasted on pancakes and tried to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. One autumn evening, I was at the dining table surrounded by textbooks and notes as I worked on a history essay. It was important. I was determined to keep my straight A's. In the living room, Samantha flipped channels on the TV, her own homework discarded after minimal effort. Elizabeth swept into the dining room with a wine glass in hand and frowned at my spread of papers. "You're monopolizing the table, dear," she said, voice sugary sweet but with an edge. "Can't you do that in your room? We'd like to have a nice family evening without all this." She gestured vaguely at my textbooks, as if they were offensive. My face burned. They weren't even using the table, I thought. "I have a project due tomorrow," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Upstairs." Now Elizabeth cut me off, her tone still polite on the surface. But her eyes were cold steel. I scrambled to gather my things, hands shaking with humiliation and anger. As I turned to leave, she sighed dramatically and murmured to Samantha, "See, she doesn't understand consideration for others." The words hit me like a slap. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood and fled upstairs. In my room, I closed the door softly and pressed my back against it, fighting tears of frustration. That was the night I realized just how sharp Elizabeth's smile could cut. After that, the household atmosphere grew more hostile by the day. Elizabeth had a million petty ways to remind me I was an outsider. She always found ways to make me feel small. She tripled my chore load. I washed the dishes, did laundry, scrubbed floors, while Samantha conveniently always had homework or cheer practice as an excuse. If I dared object, Elizabeth would arch an eyebrow and coo, "I'm teaching you responsibility, sweetheart. You do want to be responsible, don't you?" It didn't matter how unfair it was, Around my father, she maintained the act of the caring, patient stepmother. But the minute we were alone, her true self slithered out, cold, critical, impossible to please. Once or twice I mustered the courage to hint to Dad that things weren't so perfect. Each time he just squeezed my shoulder and said, "Give Elizabeth a chance, kiddo. It's not easy for her stepping into your mom's shoes." He'd remind me that Elizabeth loved me in her own way, and that building a family takes patience. I could see the plea in his eyes not to make him choose sides. So I nodded and forced a smile. "Okay, Dad." Afterward, I would retreat to my room and scream into my pillow, or furiously write in my journal to vent the injustice. I learned to swallow my pain in silence for Dad's sake. Meanwhile, Samantha followed her mother's lead. I had hoped at first that we could be real sisters, maybe even friends. We were so close in age it seemed possible. But Samantha saw me as competition from day one. If I scored highest on a math test, she'd roll her eyes and mutter "show off" just loud enough for me to hear. If the school called home about me winning an award, the message mysteriously never reached my father. And when I discovered my track medals, precious tokens of one of the few things outside academics that brought me joy, tossed in the garbage bin, I knew exactly who was responsible. I confronted Samantha, my voice trembling with rage. She just shrugged a ghost of a smirk on her lips and said, "Why are you accusing me with mock innocence?" Elizabeth, of course, backed her up. "I'm sure it was just an accident," she said, barely concealing her satisfaction as I cradled the tangled ribbons and metal in my hands. "Don't be so dramatic, dear." Each day in that house, I felt my mother's absence. I missed Mom's gentle voice encouraging me to chase my dreams. With Elizabeth, I was tiptoeing over eggshells and broken glass, careful not to anger her or give Samantha another reason to torment me. The only refuge I had was my tiny bedroom at the end of the hall, the one spot in the house still truly mine. Most nights I'd retreat there and bury myself in textbooks and notepads. Studying became both my escape and my lifeline. I told myself that if I could just hold on until college, I'd finally be free. In a worn notebook hidden under my mattress, I scribbled little mantras to keep myself going. Work hard, ace your exams, get into a great school, earn a scholarship, and then you can leave this all behind. Those words kept me alive on the darkest days. They were my hope, my salvation. By my junior year of high school, I was on track to be valedictorian. Teachers praised my dedication. Classmates knew me as the quiet overachiever who always aced the exams. I hardly ever brought friends home I couldn't bear for anyone to see how I was treated, so I funneled all my energy into academics. It paid off with perfect grades, academic awards, honor society offices, the works. To the outside world, we seemed like a normal, happy, blended family. Elizabeth made sure of that, wearing her sweetest smile at school conferences and neighborhood barbecues. One Thanksgiving, a relative even told me I was lucky to have a stepmom as caring as Elizabeth. I just smiled and nodded, choking on the irony. Lucky living with Elizabeth felt more like keeping a cobra in the house. Still, for Dad's sake and my own sanity, I kept hoping. I thought that maybe if I achieved enough, if I became the perfect student, the perfect daughter, Elizabeth would finally accept me. Maybe she'd even be proud of me like a real mom would. Perhaps Samantha and I could find common ground if her mother wasn't always comparing us like rival pawns in some twisted game. It was a naive dream, but it was all I had to hold on to. I had no way of knowing that the closer I inched toward my dreams, the more threatened Elizabeth would become. A storm was brewing on the horizon, dark and unyielding. It would all start with a college application, the golden ticket I believed would unlock my future. In my optimistic innocence, I couldn't imagine that the woman I called stepmother would soon turn that dream to confetti, shredding my future into irretrievable pieces as if it were nothing but trash. By the time senior year rolled around, college applications were all I could think about. They were supposed to be my ticket out. At school, teachers and counselors praised my achievements and urged me to aim for the nation's top universities. I dared to hope again. But at home, any mention of my college plans ignited tension. One evening at dinner, Dad gently brought up the subject of applications. "Have you girls thought about where you'd like to apply?" he asked, trying to sound casual. I opened my mouth, excited to share my dreams, but Elizabeth spoke first. "Samantha will be applying to some prestigious schools, Princeton, Stanford, maybe Yale," she declared, smiling at her daughter. Then with a glance at me, she added, "As for our girl here, we've agreed she'll stick to State College. It's affordable and close to home." I felt as if I'd been doused in cold water. Dad gave a feeble nod, not meeting my eyes. He didn't object. He didn't fight for me. I pushed the food around on my plate, my appetite gone. In that moment, I understood if I wanted a future beyond Elizabeth's grasp, I would have to fight for it myself, in secret if need be. And so I did. Over the next few weeks, I quietly gathered application forms and fee waivers, thanks to Mrs. Thompson, who suspected I'd need them. I wrote draft after draft of personal essays and studied scholarship options late into the night. I hid my college paperwork deep under my mattress and worked on the school library computers whenever I could, telling Elizabeth I had study group or volunteer hours. Meanwhile, Elizabeth poured time and money into Samantha's college campaign. She hired pricey tutors to boost Samantha's test scores and whisked her off on campus tours around the country, trips I was conspicuously excluded from. Each week I endured dinner conversations about the gorgeous libraries at Yale or the historic courtyards at Princeton, all described in vivid detail by Samantha, while Elizabeth beamed. I bit my tongue and let them believe I was resigned to attending State College. But their bragging only steeled my resolve. I was determined to send off at least one application to my dream school, even if it had to be behind their backs. My subterfuge nearly paid off. By early December, I had completed an application to my top choice, East Coast University, a prestigious school I'd yearned to attend ever since I'd read about it in a college guidebook. I had everything ready: transcript, recommendation letters, essays, and thanks to a waiver, the application fee was covered. All I needed was to slip the envelope into the mail. It felt thrilling and terrifying to be on the cusp of defying Elizabeth's dictates. But I wasn't as invisible as I thought. The day disaster struck started like any other. I came home from school, backpack laden with books, and tucked in a secret compartment the big manila envelope addressed to East Coast University. I planned to mail it that evening when I went out for a library run. I thought I was being so careful. But as I stepped into my bedroom, I froze. My heart plummeted straight to my gut. There on my bed lay the contents of my backpack, including the East Coast University envelope, which had been ripped open. My carefully prepared application papers were scattered across the quilt like debris from an explosion. And standing over them, her arms folded and her expression thunderous, was Elizabeth. Looking for something, she asked, holding up one of my pages between two fingers. My throat went dry. I hadn't heard her come into my room. She must have been snooping, or maybe she felt the thick envelope when she went to hang up my bag. However it happened, my secret was out. "I can explain," I stammered, stepping forward. Panic sent my pulse roaring in my ears. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Her voice dropped into a deadly calm register that I had only heard a few times before, a tone that meant she was livid. "After all we discussed, you still went behind our backs to apply to this fancy school." She shook the page she was holding. the first page of my application form, in front of me. I glanced around desperately. Samantha hovered in the doorway, drawn by the commotion, a slow, cruel smile spreading across her face. She looked positively delighted that I'd been caught red-handed. I wanted to try. I said, my voice small but firm, my eyes pleaded with Elizabeth. East Coast has a great program in literature, and they have financial aid. I wouldn't ask Dad for anything, I swear. I can get scholarships. Please, I've worked so hard, absolutely not. Elizabeth's reply was ice. How dare you even attempt this after I made myself clear State College wasn't a suggestion, it was the plan. You can't decide that for me. I protested, a tremor creeping into my voice. I deserve a chance to go to a good university. I've earned it. Her eyes flashed. You've earned nothing without this family, she snapped. Who feeds you, who puts a roof over your head, and this is how you repay us, by sneaking around. She threw the application page down onto the bed. Who do you expect will pay for your flights, your housing, your books? Did you think about any of that while you played? Pretend with these papers I told you I'll get aid. I can take loans if I have to. I'll work. I'm not asking you for anything. My voice cracked under the weight of her contempt. Oh, you naive girl, Elizabeth hissed, now seething through her teeth. Even if you got in, which you won't, college isn't just about tuition. It's thousands of dollars of expenses. Your father is not going to bankrupt our family just so you can feel special at some ivy-covered campus. She stepped forward, and instinctively I stepped back. I manage our finances, and I am telling you, East Coast University is off the table. You are not going. Anger and despair welled up inside me, battling for control. You can't stop me from applying, I said, a last surge of defiance making me bold. Plenty of kids go to colleges their parents don't approve of. You're not God, you can't control my future. A dangerous smile tugged at the corner of Elizabeth's lips. Watch me, she whispered. In a flash, she swept up the pile of my application papers from the bed. Before I could react, she brushed past me, heading straight for the adjoining study where Dad kept a shredder by his desk. I burst into motion, panic clawing at me. No, wait, I cried. By the time I reached her, Elizabeth had lifted the top off the shredder's paper slot. One by one, she began feeding my documents into the machine. A mechanical whir filled the room as the shredder eagerly devoured the fruits of my hard work. I grabbed at her arm in desperation. Stop, please, I begged, tears blurring my vision. I could see strips of paper curling out of the shredder's basket below jagged ribbons of my dreams. Samantha stood in the doorway, eyes bright with schadenfreude. Too late, she sing-songed under her breath. I made a futile attempt to snatch a page before it went in, but Elizabeth roughly shouldered me back. The last page, my personal essay, the one where I'd poured my heart out, about my late mother's influence, slid into the shredder with a harsh crunch. In seconds, it was confetti. The machine stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, trembling, my hands half raised as if to grab ghost papers that were no longer whole. My breath came in ragged gasps. It felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me. Elizabeth pressed the power button on the shredder and turned to face me. Her satisfaction barely showed. Only a slight lift to her chin and a glint in her eyes betrayed her triumph. There, she said softly, dusting off her hands as though disposing of something filthy. No more fantasies. You'll thank me one day for this. It's for your own good. I looked down at the shredder's trash bin, at the irreversibly shredded scraps of my future. A numbness crept over me, cold and total. My vision tunneled. I could hear my heartbeat thudding in my ears, and somewhere behind me, the faint sound of Samantha's delighted giggle. In that moment, as I stood surrounded by the ruins of my aspiration, something inside me cracked. Elizabeth turned on her heel, motioning for her daughter to follow. I sank to my knees, dizziness washing over me. She had finally done it. She had crushed my dream, and with it, a piece of my soul. Elizabeth had won. After the shredding incident, I fell into a deep darkness. In the days that followed, I moved through life like a ghost, hollowed out and numb. At school, I still attended classes and turned in assignments. Old habits kept me going on autopilot. But the spark I once had was gone. The girl who would eagerly raise her hand, who stayed up late perfecting essays and projects, had been extinguished. In her place was a husk of a person who didn't care anymore. What was the point of straight A's or honors now? My dream had been ripped to shreds, literally, and with it went my motivation, my joy, my hope. At home, I drifted silently from room to room, careful to avoid Elizabeth and Samantha. I couldn't bear to face them. The mere sight of my stepmother made my stomach twist with a mix of fear and anger that I didn't know how to handle. I spent hours shut in my bedroom curtains, drawn, lying on my bed and staring at the ceiling. Sometimes tears would leak out of the corners of my eyes without warning, rolling down into my hairline. Other times I just felt nothing. A heavy, leaden nothingness that pressed on my chest and made it hard to breathe. The next morning, the evidence of my broken dream was already erased. Shredded scraps and torn envelopes gone as if my aspirations had never existed at all. Elizabeth never breathed a word of it to my father. To the world, she pretended nothing was wrong, dismissing my withdrawn state as senior year stress whenever anyone asked. Dad, for his part, knew something was wrong but didn't know how to approach me. He knocked gently on my bedroom door a couple of nights after the incident. I was at my desk trying to finish homework that should have taken an hour, but had stretched into 3 due to my bleak distraction. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly, peeking in. "You have a minute?" I turned to him, trying to muster a smile and failing. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse from crying in secret. He stepped inside, concern etched on his face. "You've been really quiet lately. I just wanted to check if you're okay." He sat on the edge of my bed, patting the spot next to him. I couldn't remember the last time Dad had come into my room just to talk. The sight of him sitting there kindly and worried almost broke me open. I lowered myself onto the bed beside him. My throat tightened painfully. I wanted to scream the truth that I was far from okay, that Elizabeth had demolished my dreams, and I was drowning in despair. I wanted him to somehow already know, to have discovered the shredder's contents and pieced them back together as proof of what she'd done. But of course he hadn't. He was looking at me like I was a fragile thing, and I realized he had no clue why I was like this. Part of me was furious at him, at his obliviousness, at the way he deferred to Elizabeth in all things. But another part just missed him. Missed having a parent who was on my side. "I'm fine, Dad," I lied quietly. "Just stressed about school and the future." That last part wasn't entirely a lie. My future was exactly what I was grieving. He nodded, his eyes full of sympathy. "I know it's a lot, but you're going to do great. Okay, State College will be lucky to have you." He nudged my shoulder playfully, trying to cheer me up. State College. My throat burned with the threat of tears, but I swallowed them down. "Yeah," I whispered, dropping my gaze to my hands. "Lucky to have me." If only he knew how close I'd been to something more. Dad pulled me into a gentle side hug. "I'm proud of you, you know," he said softly. I tensed in his arm, unexpectedly angered by the words. Proud for what? For giving up. for resigning myself to the cage Elizabeth built. He had no idea what had transpired, and I was too beaten down to tell him. "Thanks," I mumbled. I didn't trust myself to say more. If I did, I might unleash months' worth of frustration and sorrow, and I wasn't sure I could stop once I started. He gave me one more worried look, then quietly left my room. As the door clicked shut, a fresh wave of loneliness crashed over me. Even with Dad in the next room, I felt utterly alone in my pain. I went through the motions at school, doing only what I had to. My teachers noticed my dimmed spirit. Mrs. Thompson gently asked if I was all right when I skipped an optional scholarship essay. I mumbled that I was fine and just sticking with state college plans. She said I should be proud of my bright future there. I nodded and fled before her kindness made me cry. At home, Elizabeth acted as if everything was perfectly normal. If anything, she seemed more relaxed now that I was handled. She'd leave state college brochures on the counter and chirp about scheduling orientation, clearly pleased that I was following her plan. I just nodded or grunted in reply. My quiet compliance was her trophy. Samantha, meanwhile, barely acknowledged me. In her mind, I'd been firmly put in my place. I even overheard her telling a friend on the phone, with a cruel little laugh, that I was just going to the local college after all. It stung, but I was too exhausted and defeated to even respond. I stopped checking social media because each day brought new posts from classmates celebrating college acceptances I could never even try for. Seeing their joy was unbearable. That could have been me, should have been me, but I'd never get the chance. In my darkest moments, I clutched a photo of Mom and me and whispered apologies into the night. I felt I'd failed both her and myself by letting them win. I imagined her gentle voice telling me to hold on, but I couldn't see how. Not from down in this pit of despair. Even being on track as valedictorian felt hollow now. What wisdom could I offer as graduation speaker, "Work hard for your dreams," had become a cruel joke in my mind. Rock bottom isn't always one moment. Sometimes it's a drawn-out period of quiet despair. That spring, I lived in that low, sunless place, convinced I would never climb out. I had lost. Elizabeth had won. And the future, a future on her terms, stretched out before me like a life sentence. Spring brought a shift in the winds of fate, just not in the way Elizabeth or Samantha had anticipated. As March rolled in, college decision letters and emails began arriving for Samantha from all the prestigious universities she'd applied to. I could sense the tension simmering beneath our roof, though no one spoke of it openly. Samantha, usually full of teenage bravado, grew more irritable and anxious by the day. Elizabeth's confident facade started to crack as well. I caught her chewing her manicured nails more than once, a habit she normally scorned. The first rejection came in late March. I was doing dishes in the kitchen when we heard a shrill cry from the foyer where Samantha had been checking the mail. She stormed in, face flushed and eyes brimming with angry tears, a thin envelope crumpled in her hand. "Stanford said no," she spat, throwing the letter onto the counter. "They rejected me." Elizabeth was at her side in an instant. "Oh, sweetheart." She picked up the letter and skimmed it, her lips pressing into a tight line. "It's just one. It's so competitive nowadays. I'm sure the others will have better news. Stanford's lost, darling." But I could hear the worry behind her soothing tone. That was only the beginning. Over the next 2 weeks, the bad news piled up. A curt email from Yale, another thin envelope from Princeton, even the state's flagship university, one of Samantha's safety schools she was certain would accept her, sent a regretful notice. Every afternoon, I watched Samantha's expression darken a bit more as she refreshed her email or tore into another envelope. her bubbly arrogance drained away, replaced by disbelief and panic. Night after night, muffled sobs and angry whispers seeped through the walls. I could catch fragments of their anguish, Elizabeth railing that the schools had made a terrible mistake, Samantha crying that it wasn't fair and she had done everything right. The blame, the disappointment, it hung heavy in the house. Sure enough, with all other options exhausted, Elizabeth was forced to do the unthinkable, have Samantha follow my path to State College. In early April, a thick envelope arrived from State, an acceptance packet for Samantha's last-minute application. I witnessed them at the mailbox, Elizabeth's hand shaking as she held the emblem of the school she once deemed unworthy. Samantha ripped it open, saw that she was admitted, and burst into tears of humiliation. The very college they'd scorned for me was now her only lifeline. Elizabeth caught my eye as I walked up, her pride in tatters. "State is a fine school," she muttered defensively. I just shrugged, masking any expression. The irony was almost too perfect. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the house shifted to a sullen quiet. The bragging rights Elizabeth had so cherished were gone. In their place was a humbled silence. I meanwhile felt something unexpected flicker to life inside me. Not happiness exactly, but a grim sense of vindication. For the first time in a long while, I had a bit of energy in my step. I was watching, waiting, thinking. An opportunity was taking shape like a seed, drifting on the breeze, looking for soil to take root. One evening, I was in the study room, organizing some paperwork for my own college enrollment. In my hands, I held my acceptance letter from State College, the school I never wanted, but had resigned myself to. The college's letterhead at the top glinted with an embossed seal, the bold letters of the university's name, official and proud. I ran my fingers over the raised emblem. That letter represented a future I hadn't chosen, but it was still my future. And now, by a twist of fate, it was also Samantha's only lifeline. I glanced toward the living room where I could hear Elizabeth murmuring to Samantha. They were discussing orientation dates for State in hushed, joyless tones. My eyes drifted back to the letterhead. An idea began to form, uncoiling slowly in the back of my mind. It was an idea so daring and so satisfying in its symmetry that I almost pushed it away in fear. But the more I considered it, the more it took root. Elizabeth had taken something precious from me and never faced a consequence for it. Now her daughter's academic fate lay on a knife's edge of uncertainty and embarrassment. For once, they were the vulnerable ones, filled with doubt and insecurity. I realized I finally held a few cards in my hand. Perhaps it was time to play them. As I carefully placed my acceptance letter back into its envelope, I felt the corners of my mouth twitch in what might have been the beginning of a smile. For the first time in a long while, I was envisioning an outcome that didn't end with me simply swallowing my pain. The balance of power in our household had shifted ever so slightly, and I felt a stirring of my old self, waking up, a self ready to take action. I knew exactly what I needed to do. Once the seed of revenge was planted in my mind, it grew with astonishing speed. I spent nights lying awake in bed, imagining and refining my plan in the dark. What I intended to do was bold and more than a little risky, but every time doubt crept in, I thought about the sound of my application being shredded and the sight of Elizabeth's cold smile as she told me it was for my own good. The memory was like fuel burning away any hesitation. They had shown no mercy in crushing my dream. I would show none in delivering their comeuppance. The first step was to gather my materials. Late one afternoon, when I had the house to myself, I carefully pulled out my own college acceptance packet from State College. I had kept it tucked in the back of my closet, unopened beyond the initial glance since the day it arrived. It felt too bittersweet to celebrate. Now, however, it served a new purpose. I gently extracted one of the official sheets, emblazoned with the university's letterhead, a crisp header with the school's crest and address, and held it up to the light. This would do nicely. Next, I needed the right words. Fortunately, I'd had plenty of examples to study. The rejection letters and emails Samantha received were still lying around the house, on the counter on her desk, crumpled in wastebaskets. It wasn't hard to fish one out without anyone noticing. I chose the Stanford letter I had smoothed out earlier. Its phrasing was polite, almost apologetic, yet utterly devastating. "We regret to inform you." Those 4 words had shattered Samantha. And a similar set of words had been denied to me thanks to Elizabeth. Now I would repurpose them for my own ends. I sat at my desk and began to draft the letter. My hands were steady, my mind eerily clear. Line by line, I forged a message as if from the state college admissions office. I explained that due to an unexpected reevaluation of our incoming class size, the university could not offer Samantha admission after all. I even apologized for the administrative error of any earlier acceptance letter. The tone was professionally sympathetic, the kind of detached disappointment that felt believable. Rereading the finished text, I almost smiled at how convincing it sounded, simultaneously sincere and cruel. To add authenticity, I signed it with the name of an actual admissions director I found on the college's website. Then beneath the signature, I typed out their name and title. I compared my draft to the real rejection letter. I had the format, the language, even the font. Satisfied, I loaded the university letterhead paper into our home printer. For a split second, I hesitated. This was the point of no return. But the flare of vengeance in my chest burned bright. I clicked print. The printer hummed softly, then spat out the letter. I gingerly lifted the freshly minted page. It looked perfect. If I hadn't known better, I would have thought it came straight from the admissions office. My heart pounded at the thought of what this paper in my hand could do. "This will hurt them," a voice inside me whispered. 1 part warning, 3 parts anticipation. "Are you really ready for that?" I closed my eyes and pictured Elizabeth sneering as I sobbed on the floor, the shredded remnants of my future around me. I pictured Samantha's smug grin whenever I was put down or cast aside. Yes, I thought. I'm ready. I took the original envelope from my state packet, emblazoned with the college logo, and slipped the forged letter inside. A bit of glue on the flap, and it was sealed anew. Using a printed label with Samantha's name and our address to cover my own, I made sure it looked exactly like a fresh piece of official mail. I knew the mail carrier arrived late morning, and since Samantha and Elizabeth were home on spring break, the timing was perfect. The moment our mailman drove off one day, I quietly approached our mailbox. I swiftly slipped my letter into the stack of envelopes he'd just delivered, nestling it mid-pile. I walked back in and casually set the mail on the hallway table, calling out "Mail's here" loud enough for whoever was nearby. Then I retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to fetch a snack, but really to observe from a safe distance. My heart was thundering in my ears. It didn't take long. "I'll get it." I heard Samantha yell from upstairs, her footsteps thudding down. It was actually surprising. Since her slew of rejections, she'd been avoiding the mail. Perhaps now that she had an acceptance in hand, even if it was just state, she assumed the worst was over. Or maybe Elizabeth had coaxed her into being on the lookout for some scholarship information that might redeem the situation. Either way, I hadn't expected her to sound eager. I peered around the kitchen doorway just enough to see the foyer. Samantha scooped up the pile of mail. From where I stood, I could clearly see the large state college envelope in her hands. My heart rate jackrabbited as she frowned at it, probably noting it looked just like the earlier packet she'd opened. For a second, I was afraid she might be suspicious. After all, why would State be sending another big envelope so soon? But then I saw her shrug, muttering something. She likely assumed it was follow-up paperwork or a housing form. She called out for Elizabeth, who hurried in from the living room. I ducked out of sight as Samantha tore open the envelope. Paper rustled. A heavy silence fell. Then I heard Elizabeth's baffled voice, "What on earth?" followed by Samantha's voice, high with alarm. "Mom, what does it say? What's wrong?" I inched quietly back to the doorway, just enough to peek into the foyer without revealing myself. Elizabeth was reading the letter, her face ashen. Samantha hovered at her shoulder, eyes wide and uncomprehending. I could see Elizabeth's hand trembling. Samantha snatched the letter from her mother, her eyes darting across the lines. "No," she breathed. This can't be real. They're rescinding my acceptance." Her voice broke on the last word. My pulse skittered wildly. Even expecting this reaction, the reality of it was overwhelming. Samantha's face had gone stark white, her free hand flying to cover her mouth. Elizabeth grabbed the letter back, as if rereading it could somehow change the words. I stepped fully into the hallway, now my presence still unnoticed by them. From my vantage, I could see Samantha's knees begin to buckle. She staggered a step, grabbing Elizabeth's arm. "Mom, they said they made a mistake. I'm not going to State." Her tone escalated from disbelief to panic. A sound escaped Elizabeth, a strangled, furious sound. "This has to be a mistake," she hissed, though her voice quavered. It's outrageous. I'll call them right now." She looked up then, and that's when her eyes landed on me standing a few feet away. I made no attempt to hide the expression on my face. I'm not sure exactly what I looked like to her. Calm, cold, triumphant. All I know is that in that moment, I felt a grim weight lifting off my shoulders as the balance of our little universe shifted. Elizabeth's eyes narrowed, dawning comprehension and fury igniting within them. "You," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. Samantha whipped her head toward me, next confusion knitting her brow through the tears. Elizabeth crumpled the letter in her fist, her composure unraveling. I stood my ground, heart pounding, but chin held high. This was the moment I had been waiting for. For a long electric moment, none of us spoke. The only sound was the crinkling of the letter in Elizabeth's fist and Samantha's ragged breathing as she stared at me, tears still streaking her cheeks. Elizabeth's face contorted in rage and disbelief. She looked almost feral, like a cornered animal. "You," she repeated, voice low and trembling with fury. "What have you done?" I felt strangely calm. My heart was pounding, yes, but my voice came out steady and cold. "I did what I had to do," I said quietly. "Something you should find very familiar, Elizabeth." Her eyes widened, a flash of understanding crossing them. You wrote this." She shook the crumpled letter at me. Samantha stared at me in bewilderment. "Why?" she croaked, tears spilling. Before I could answer, Elizabeth let out a bitter laugh. I know why, she hissed, stepping forward. There was a manic gleam in her eyes now. "This is revenge, isn't it?" She was shaking, whether from anger or shock or both. "After everything I've done for you. You destroyed me." I interrupted, my calm beginning to crack. I could feel years of pent-up pain rising in my throat. "You took my future and ran it through a shredder, Elizabeth. All because you couldn't stand that I had a shot somewhere else, somewhere beyond your control." Elizabeth's nostrils flared. "Don't twist this around," she spat at me. Samantha turned to her mother, voice trembling. "Mom, did you really do that?" For a moment, Elizabeth said nothing. Then, flinging off Samantha's grasp, she snapped, "I did what was necessary. It was for her own good." Oh my God, Samantha breathed, stumbling back. How could you? Elizabeth whirled back to me. You ungrateful little trying to ruin my daughter's life. A red mist of anger passed over me. You ruined mine first, I shouted. I was just an inconvenience to you. You tore away everything I worked for. She lunged at me, hand raised. Enough, a new voice thundered. We all startled, turning toward the front door. Dad was standing there, keys still in hand, his face pale and eyes blazing. None of us had heard him come in, but it was clear he'd heard enough. The sight of him made my heart leap to my throat. He was home early from work, and judging by the look on his face, he was piecing together more than a few terrible things. He stepped forward, eyes sweeping over the scene, the letter in Elizabeth's hand, Samantha's tears, my stance. What the hell is going on? He demanded, voice dangerously quiet. Elizabeth dropped her hand and rushed to speak first. Thank God you're here. She, pointing at me, faked a letter to hurt Samantha. Dad silenced her with a glare and snatched the letter from Elizabeth's hand. As he scanned it, his face contorted in confusion and anger. Why would you do this? He asked me, voice thick. I swallowed hard tears, blurring my vision, because I needed you both to feel what I felt. I said quietly, then nodded toward Elizabeth. Ask her about my East Coast University application, Dad. Ask her what she did. Dad's eyes moved to Elizabeth. Confusion gave way to a glimmer of dread. Liz. What is she saying? Elizabeth blanched, a fine sheen of sweat on her brow. Don't listen to her. She's trying to twist things. She lied to us about that application, Richard, she said quickly, voice a saccharine facsimile of calm that wavered at the edges. I had to intervene. She was going behind our backs. Intervene, I cut in a bitter laugh, escaping me. You call destroying my application intervening. Dad's gaze snapped back to me, then to her. Destroying? His voice dropped to almost a whisper, as if afraid to say it. Elizabeth, did you actually destroy her college application? There was a beat of agonizing silence. Elizabeth opened her mouth, but no excuses came. My father's expression was answer enough. He could see the truth written on her face, plain as day. Oh my God. He breathed, the color draining from his cheeks. His hand crumpled the forged letter at his side. You did. You really did. Samantha let out a small sob and sank into a chair in the hallway, burying her face in her hands. Dad's disbelief transformed into something else then, something I had rarely seen in him directed at anyone but himself. Cold, simmering rage. He turned on Elizabeth, his hands shaking. How could you? He said in a low, dangerous voice. That was her future. She's my daughter and you. He stopped himself, pressing a hand to his forehead as if trying to stave off exploding. I trusted you with her. I trusted you. Elizabeth bristled, some of her defiance returning. Don't you lecture me, Richard, she snapped. I did what we agreed was best. She was applying to a ridiculously expensive faraway school that we never agreed to pay for. I was protecting our family, our finances, protecting Samantha's chances. She shot a look at me like I was something foul. She had everyone thinking she's some saint, but she was sneaking around. I simply evened the playing field. Dad's eyes flashed. No justification in the world can excuse what you did, he said. You wouldn't have had the spine to do what was necessary, Elizabeth retorted, voice sharp. You'd have let her waste money we don't have just to play hero to your precious firstborn. I did what needed doing for Samantha. Samantha let out a sob. Did you really think this helped me, Mom? She asked weakly, wiping her eyes. Elizabeth opened her mouth but found no answer. I looked at Samantha through my tears. I'm sorry, I whispered brokenly. Samantha just shook her head, wiping her face. Dad took a deep breath, turning a hard gaze on Elizabeth. I think we've had enough of your kind of help, Elizabeth. Her eyes snapped to him, panicked. Richard, no. He raised a hand. I've heard enough. I can't even look at you right now. He gestured toward the door with that same trembling hand. Get out. Elizabeth reeled as if slapped. What? What did you say? Pack a bag and get out of this house. Dad snarled each word like a bullet. We're done. I will not spend another day under the same roof with someone capable of what you've done. You can't just... Elizabeth sputtered, her face draining of color. Get out! Dad roared, the echo of it ringing through the foyer. I jumped. I had never ever heard him shout like that. Samantha let out a frightened whimper. Even Elizabeth seemed stunned into silence, her eyes glossy with shock. For a moment, no one moved. Elizabeth's chest rose and fell rapidly. She glanced at Dad, then at Samantha, who pointedly looked away, and then at me. The hatred in her glare was unmistakable, but beneath it was something like panic. This is my home too, she began weakly, but Dad had already turned his back on her, wrapping an arm protectively around my shoulders. The gesture made my throat tighten. Not anymore, he said quietly, his voice like steel. I'll have your things sent, but I want you gone. Now. A tense beat passed. Elizabeth's face twisted through a gamut of emotions. Fury, disbelief, despair. Finally, with a snarl of frustration, she spun on her heel and stalked toward the staircase. Fine, she snapped, her voice shrill and breaking. I'll go. But don't think you've won, either of you. She paused on the first stair, throwing a finger in my direction. You especially. You think you're so clever? You're just as spiteful and vindictive as you imagine me to be. I met her glare head-on, my body still shaking with adrenaline. Maybe I am, I said quietly. I wonder how I learned that living with you. Elizabeth let out a scoff of disgust, shook her head, and dashed up the stairs. A door slammed moments later, the last petulant act of a tyrant losing her kingdom. In the ringing silence that followed, Dad's arm tightened around me. I realized I was trembling from head to foot. It was over. God, it was over. Samantha remained sitting in the chair, staring vacantly at the floor. She looked utterly lost, as if the ground beneath her had given way. Dad gently released me and went to her. Sammy, he murmured, kneeling beside her. She lifted her eyes to him and then unexpectedly to me. Shame and sorrow mingled on her face. I'm sorry, she whispered brokenly. I wasn't sure if it was meant for me, her father, or just a general lament to the universe. Perhaps all three. With tears in my own eyes, I crossed the space between us. Dad moved aside as I knelt in front of Samantha. Slowly, almost awkwardly, I reached out and took her hand. I am too, I whispered back. She let out a shaky sob and squeezed my hand tightly. In that moment, amid the wreckage of lies and revenge, we two girls, once pitted against each other, found a strange sort of common ground in our hurt. Dad looked down at Samantha and me, eyes filled with regret and relief. We'll figure this out, he murmured, voice rough but kind. Despite everything, I felt a weight begin to lift from my shoulders at those words. The storm had broken at last. In its wake lay damage that would take time to heal, but also a sense of grim justice. At long last, the truth was out, and the worst was behind us. In the days that followed the confrontation, the reality of what had happened settled over our household, like dust after a wrecking ball. The silence was strange and fragile. Elizabeth had retreated to a guest room for one night, and by the next evening she was gone. taking only a single suitcase with the bare essentials. True to his word, Dad arranged for the rest of her belongings to be sent later. There was no dramatic farewell or last-minute pleas. The marriage was effectively over. A lawyer friend of my father's quietly started the paperwork for a divorce. I thought I would feel triumphant seeing her go, but truthfully, I mostly felt hollow and exhausted. I remember watching from the upstairs window as Elizabeth's car backed out of the driveway for the last time. She never even looked up. I wasn't sure if I expected her to. A chapter of our lives had slammed shut, and all of us, Dad, Samantha, and I, were left blinking in the harsh new light of day. In the immediate aftermath, the house was eerily calm. There were no more sharp-tongued remarks over breakfast, no tense dinners with Elizabeth dominating the conversation. But there was also an emptiness where her presence, as negative as it often was, had been. We were a broken family, piecing ourselves together out of the debris. For a while, Samantha avoided me, and I gave her space. She was grieving the mother she thought she had, coming to terms with the reality of who Elizabeth truly was. I often heard her crying at night, through the thin wall that separated our bedrooms. It sounded like a lifetime's worth of disillusionment pouring out. I didn't know how to comfort her. In truth, I wasn't sure if she would even want comfort from me. Dad, meanwhile, walked around with a heaviness in his eyes that I had never seen before. He was racked with guilt. That much was obvious. One evening, about a week after the blow-up, he came into my room and sat on the edge of my bed, much like he did the night I lied to him about being fine. Only this time I wasn't pretending anymore. "I'm so sorry," he began, his voice breaking almost immediately. "For everything. For not seeing what was happening right in front of me. I should have protected you." Tears glistened in his eyes. I felt my own throat tighten. Seeing my father, my strong, gentle father, so broken, hurt more than all of Elizabeth's cruelty combined. I scooted closer and took his hand. "I know, Dad," I whispered. "It's not your fault. She fooled us both." He shook his head. No, I let her drive a wedge between us. I'll never forgive myself for that." A tear slipped down his cheek. I had never seen my father cry. It unleashed something in me, and suddenly I was crying too. For the first time since that day in the foyer, we hugged tightly, and in that embrace, years of tension and misunderstanding seemed to wash away. We couldn't change the past, but in that moment, we quietly promised to be better for each other in the future. Samantha's turn came a few days later. She approached me hesitantly while I was reading on the back porch. I looked up to find her standing there wringing her hands. Her eyes were puffy and earnest. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I nodded, moving my bookmark and setting my novel aside. She sat down on the bench across from me, folding into herself in a posture of remorse I'd never expected to see from the usually prideful Samantha. "I owe you an apology," she said, picking at the hem of her sleeve. "A bunch of apologies, actually." I didn't interrupt. I sensed she needed to get this out. "I was awful to you," she continued, her voice trembling. "Maybe I didn't shred any applications, but I enabled Mom. I laughed when she put you down. I took things that mattered to you and acted like it was nothing. I thought if I sided with her, she'd love me more, or maybe I just enjoyed seeing you knocked down because I was jealous." She bit her lip hard. "I was so jealous of you. You were always amazing in school, and Dad, he was always proud of you even if he didn't say it much. Mom kept telling me I had to beat you, had to be better so we'd both get what we wanted. But all it did was turn me into a bully. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Her words spilled out in a rush, raw and sincere. Tears slipped down her face, and I realized I was crying silently too. All those years of resentment between us finally brought to the surface and exposed under the stark light of truth. It felt both terrible and cleansing. "Samantha," I said quietly once I found my voice. I forgive you." My own words surprised me, but as I said them, I knew they were true. I know how much influence she had on both of us. And I'm sorry too. I never wanted to hurt you. I hope you know that. She nodded, wiping her eyes. I know. I do know that now. Tentatively, she reached out and touched my hand. "Maybe we can try being sisters for real." A small, genuine smile found its way to my face. Possibly the first real smile I'd managed in ages. "Yeah," I whispered. "I'd like that." In that moment, a tiny bud of something new and hopeful took root between us. It would take time to grow. Trust and relationships don't mend overnight. But for the first time, we were watering that seed together instead of trying to choke each other out. Of course, not everything was neatly resolved. Our little community buzzed with whispers about the divorce. Some neighbors privately cheered that the witch was gone. Others eyed me warily when they learned I'd played a part in the drama. I accepted that as part of the fallout. Elizabeth attempted to contact Samantha with tearful apologies and excuses, but Samantha kept her distance. She told Dad and me she needed time before even considering speaking to her mother again. We supported her decision wholeheartedly. The divorce itself proceeded quickly and quietly. There was no drawn-out fight. Elizabeth didn't contest a thing. In the end, Dad allowed her a few assets in exchange for a clean break. She even signed a statement admitting to what she'd done to me, a final hollow vindication on paper. It didn't restore what I lost, but it was something. I graduated as valedictorian. In my speech, I talked about resilience and honesty, themes my family understood all too well. I spotted Dad and Samantha in the crowd sitting together and smiling up at me. One seat was conspicuously empty, a reminder of who was no longer part of our lives. But I focused on the two who were there and on the future that awaited us. Over the summer, I took on a part-time job and prepared for college. Yes, I was going to state college in the fall. That part hadn't changed, but what had changed was how I felt about it. With Elizabeth gone and the truth out, I didn't see it as a defeat anymore. Dad and I even visited the campus together during orientation, and I found myself feeling a flicker of excitement. It was a good school after all, and Dad surprised me by broaching the topic of my transferring in a year or two if I wanted. "We'll find a way," he insisted, determination in his voice that hadn't been there before. "If your heart is set on East Coast U, or anywhere else, we'll make it happen, kiddo." I didn't give him an answer about that yet. Maybe I will try to transfer, or maybe I'll discover that I'm exactly where I need to be, free of the past and able to truly spread my wings at last. Either way, knowing I have his support means the world. As for the bitterness and anger I carried for so long, I could feel it slowly beginning to dissipate. Each day without Elizabeth's shadow was a little brighter. Each genuine conversation with my dad or Samantha was a small stitch repairing the open wound of our family. There were scars, of course, for all of us. But there was also a sense of relief and hope that had been absent for far too long. Before leaving for college, I found a small remnant of my shredded East Coast University application. On a whim, I slipped that strip of letterhead into an envelope with a note and left it for Samantha. In it, I urged her to never let anyone destroy her dreams and told her I was proud to call her my sister. The hug she gave me after reading it told me I'd done the right thing in passing that torch of hope to her. The cost of my revenge had been high. It blew apart the only family structure I knew, and it forced me to confront a darker side of myself. But in a twisted way, it also set us free. Free from lies, free from manipulation, free from living under the weight of unspoken injustices. In destroying one thing, I think we gain the chance to rebuild something better. It's strange to admit, but I found a measure of redemption through that act of vengeance. Not because it was noble or good, it wasn't. It was vengeful and extreme. But because it brought the truth to light and ended a long cycle of abuse and deceit. And with the truth out, healing could finally begin for all of us. It's been some months now since the day I took my quiet revenge, and our lives changed course. I'm writing this from my dorm room at State College. The campus is peaceful at dawn, and as I watch the first light of morning filter through the window, I can't help reflecting on the journey that brought me here. In the stillness of this new life, I often replay everything that happened, the pain, the anger, the acts of betrayal, and yes, the act of revenge. What strikes me now is how deeply complex it all is. My revenge was not pure justice. It was born out of hurt and delivered in hurt. It brought to light the truth, but it also caused its own kind of damage. I've had to come to terms with that. In the immediate aftermath, I felt a surge of grim satisfaction that Elizabeth finally faced consequences. But in the weeks since, I've also felt the sting of guilt and the weight of what-ifs. Was I justified? In some ways, I believe I was. Elizabeth's actions were cruel, and she might never have been exposed without drastic measures. Samantha might never have seen her mother's true colors, and Dad might have continued in blissful ignorance while I silently withered. The truth needed to come out. I needed to reclaim some power for myself to shatter the facade that had harmed me for so long. In that sense, my revenge served its purpose. Yet I also carry remorse. I regret that Samantha got caught in the crossfire and felt even a moment of the despair I lived with. I regret that it took such extreme events for honesty and healing to begin in my family. If I've learned anything, it's that silence and secrets can be just as destructive as outright cruelty. Perhaps if I had spoken up earlier, told Dad everything, or reached out for help, things might have gone differently. Or perhaps not. I'll never truly know. What I do know is that our lives are different now. My father and I are closer than we've been in years. There are no more secrets between us. Samantha and I are, surprisingly finally, sisters in more than name. We've supported each other through the aftermath, and though it's a long road, I'm hopeful we'll keep strengthening that bond. As for Elizabeth, she's out there somewhere living with the consequences of her own decisions. I don't wish her ill, truthfully. I don't wish anything for her at all anymore. I've let go of my hatred toward her because holding on to it only keeps me tied to the past. She'll have to live with herself and what she's done, and that's punishment enough. Sometimes late at night, I still dream about that shredded college application and all it symbolized. But it doesn't haunt me like it used to. I've come to realize that while someone can try to destroy your dreams, they can't truly extinguish them unless you let them. My path changed, but my determination to build a better life for myself did not. In a strange way, the fire Elizabeth lit under my life tempered me into someone stronger, someone who now understands her own worth. I'll be honest, revenge was a slippery slope. Tasting that power, turning the tables felt good in the moment, but it also revealed a side of me I wasn't proud of. I've had to face that part of myself and decide what to do with her. I don't want to be fueled by bitterness forever. I don't want to be a person who hurts others to heal my own hurt. Going forward, I'm choosing to be more than what happened to me. I'm choosing empathy over anger whenever I can. Sharing this story with you is part of that healing. It's a confession in a way to let go of the last remaining weight on my chest. I hope it's also a testament to the resilience of those who've been wronged, and a warning that vengeance, while tempting, always comes at a cost. In the end, I found justice, but I also found that justice is messy. It doesn't arrive clean or easy, and it doesn't erase the pain that led up to it. It simply opens the door for a new beginning. And walking through that door into the unknown of a hopefully brighter future is what I'm focusing on now. I'm still learning and healing every day. I won't pretend everything is perfect now, but I wake up with hope instead of dread, and that is a victory I cherish. By sharing my story, I've reclaimed my voice. No longer the silent girl cowering in the shadows, but someone who can speak up for herself and for others who might be suffering in silence. If my journey teaches anything, I hope it's that speaking your truth is the first step toward breaking free. Thank you for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to tell, but I needed to tell it. If you've made it this far, I'm truly grateful. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been in a situation where someone you trusted betrayed you? How did you cope, and would you have done what I did? Do you think my revenge was justified, or do you feel it went too far? I invite you to share your thoughts or your own stories in the comments below. Let's support each other. Sometimes the quiet voices, the wounded souls, need to know they're not alone. And if my story resonated with you in any way, please consider sharing it. Perhaps there's someone out there in a similar situation who might find courage or comfort in these words. In the end, what I truly want is for others to know that even in the darkest of times, there is light on the other side of truth and a chance to rebuild. This has been my journey, a tale of pain, revenge, and hard-won healing. I'm looking forward to hearing about yours or your thoughts about mine. Until then, thank you for watching and being a part of this catharsis with me.